August 13, 1978. A highway in the state of Indiana. Three young people are driving calmly in their yellow Ford Pinto when they are hit from behind by a van. What should have been a common accident turns into something horrific. The fuel tank explodes. All three die burned alive. But this was no ordinary accident. It was the result of one of the coldest and most calculated decisions in American corporate history. Because the Ford Motor Company knew exactly what was going to happen. They knew people would die. And yet they sold over 3 million of these cars. This is the story of how one of the world's largest automakers put a price on human life. And that price was $11. The project was internally named the Pinto Project. The deadline? Impossible. Normally, developing a new car took 4 to 5 years. Iacocca wanted it done in 2 years. And that's when the first mistake in a series of decisions that would cost hundreds of lives began. But there was a technical problem that the engineers discovered early on. To make the car compact and cheap, they placed the fuel tank behind the rear axle, dangerously close to the bumper. In rear-end collisions, even at low speeds, the tank could rupture. And they knew it. Testing began in 1970. And the results were terrifying. In rear-end collisions at just 30 kilometers per hour, the fuel tank would systematically rupture. Fuel would leak. Sparks from twisted metal parts would ignite everything. It was a rolling time bomb. Harold McDonald, one of the test engineers, would later reveal in testimony, "We knew it was dangerous. Everyone knew. But the pressure to release the car was enormous. Iacocca would not accept delays." And then came the question that would define everything: how much would it cost to fix it? The answer was simple: $11. Just $11 per car to reposition the fuel tank or add a protective shield. For 3 million cars, that meant $33 million. And that's when Ford made a decision that still shocks to this day. In an internal memo dated 1971, which would only come to light years later during the lawsuits, Ford made a chilling calculation. They estimated how many people would die, how many would be injured, and how much it would cost in compensation. The name of the document? Cost-Benefit Analysis, Pinto Fuel Tank. What you are about to hear may be one of the darkest pages in American corporate history. In this confidential memo, discovered only in 1977, Ford literally put a price on human life. The numbers were coldly calculated: 180 deaths from burns, 180 serious injuries, 2,100 vehicles destroyed. Total cost of compensation, $49.5 million. Cost to fix all the cars, $137 million. The mathematical decision was clear: it was cheaper to let people die. But Ford's calculations had a crucial flaw. They grossly underestimated the number of accidents. In reality, hundreds of people would die. And each death could have been prevented for $11. In September 1971, the Ford Pinto was released to the public. The advertising campaign promised, "the little car that thinks big." But inside Ford, some employees nicknamed the car, the Rolling Barbecue. They knew exactly what they were selling. The first deaths began almost immediately. 1972, Richard Grimshaw, 13, suffers burns over 90% of his body after a rear-end collision. 1973, Lily Gray, 52, is burned alive in Santa Ana, California. 1974, Matthew Wyman, just 2 years old, cannot escape the burning car. Each case followed the same terrible pattern. A rear-end collision at relatively low speed, a ruptured fuel tank, and instant fire. And in each case, investigators found the same evidence. The accident would have been survivable if not for the fire. Dr. Leslie Ball, an automotive safety expert from General Motors, testified in one of the trials. "In 40 years of studying car accidents, I have never seen a design so fundamentally dangerous. It was as if they had deliberately designed a deadly trap." But Ford didn't sit still. They had a strategy. In every lawsuit, the company sent its best lawyers. The defense was always the same: blame the victims. They were driving too fast, not wearing seatbelts, not keeping distance. Anything to divert attention from the defective design. And for years it worked. Ford won most of the cases. Families devastated by loss didn't have the resources to face the armies of corporate lawyers. But in 1977, everything changed. Because someone from inside Ford decided to speak out. Harley Kopp worked at Ford for 31 years. He was respected, loyal to the company. But in 1977, something inside him broke. Maybe it was the photos he saw of the burned bodies. Maybe the faces of devastated families. Or maybe simply a conscience too heavy to bear. cop made the hardest decision of his life. He leaked internal Ford documents to Mother Jones magazine. Confidential memos, crash tests, the infamous death memo. For the first time, the American public saw what was really happening behind the scenes at Ford. The report, titled Pinto Madness, was an earthquake. The revelations were shocking. Ford knew the car was dangerous from day one. They coldly calculated how many people would die. And they decided it was an acceptable price for profit. The public reaction was immediate and furious. Protests in front of Ford dealerships. Organized boycotts. Politicians demanding investigations. And for the first time in American history, a major corporation would face criminal charges for homicide. But Ford still had one last desperate act. In November 1978, they finally announced a recall. Officially, it was to improve fire safety. They didn't mention that they had known about the problem for 7 years. They didn't admit that hundreds of people had died unnecessarily. It was too late. 1980, Winamac, Indiana. A small courtroom prepares to make history. For the first time, a major American corporation would be tried for murder. The case, the deaths of Judy, Lynn, and Donna Ulrich, the 3 young women who died in the Pinto that caught fire. Prosecutor Michael Cosentino had no illusions about what he was up against. On the other side, an army of 50 Ford lawyers, led by some of the most expensive criminal attorneys in the country. But he had something they didn't: the truth. For 3 weeks, the court heard devastating testimonies. Ford engineers admitting they knew about the problem. Families mourning the loss of loved ones. Experts explaining how $11 could have saved lives. But perhaps the most shocking moment came when Ford's former president, Lee Iacocca, was called to testify. Under oath, he admitted that he knew about the safety issues. But when asked if he regretted the decision not to fix the car, his answer chilled the courtroom: "We made the commercially right decision." Commercially right. For Iacocca, the 900 deaths estimated by the U.S. government were just numbers on a spreadsheet. The cost of doing business. On March 13, 1980, after 25 hours of deliberation, the jury acquitted Ford of criminal charges. Technically, they argued the car met the safety standards of the time. It was a legal loophole, but Ford escaped jail. But the legal victory was a devastating moral defeat. Ford was ordered to pay hundreds of millions in civil damages. Its reputation was ruined. And the Pinto case forever changed how we think about corporate responsibility. The Ford Pinto was discontinued in 1980, but its dark legacy remains. Conservative estimates point to at least 500 deaths directly related to the fuel tank defects. Other estimates go as high as 900. Each one could have been prevented for $11. But perhaps the most important lesson of the Pinto case isn't about cars or safety. It's about what happens when corporations put profit above human lives. And about how corporate arrogance can cost far more than money. Today, thanks in part to the Pinto case, we have stricter automotive safety laws. Recalls are mandatory. Executives can face jail for hiding defects. Yet we still see echoes of the same behavior. Volkswagen with Dieselgate, Boeing with the 737 MAX, GM with the ignition defect. Lee Iacocca died in 2019 at the age of 94. Until the end, he defended his decisions at Ford. In his memoirs, he wrote, "In the business world, you make the best decisions you can with the information available." But the families of the Pinto victims know he had all the necessary information. He simply chose to ignore it. The Ford Pinto was marketed as the little car that thinks big. In reality, it was the car that taught us that some corporations think far too small when it comes to human lives. And that is a lesson we cannot forget. This was the story of the Ford Pinto, the car that forever changed the relationship between consumers and corporations. A story about greed, arrogance, and the terrible price of human indifference. If this story shocked you as much as it did me, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. In the comments, tell me, did you know the story of the Ford Pinto? And what other corporate scandals would you like me to investigate? Because as long as there are secrets being hidden, I'll be here to reveal them.